Blizzard has effectively killed the need for a guild, for a community in World of Warcraft. That is a statement that I've made several times, and it is something that I truly believe in my heart. Now, I've mentioned in several videos that Blizzard over time has eroded the need for guilds, the need for communities, the need for essentially organized play, except for the highest levels of Mythic Plus and the highest levels of raiding, obviously Mythic. Now, how can I say this as raiding seems to be easier to get into than ever before in World of Warcraft's history. And I think easily we can prove my point if we start back at the beginning of WoW and we look through the years at what has happened. So if we look back at vanilla World of Warcraft, classic WoW, if you will, I think a lot of people have seen from the release of Classic that this game 15 years ago was brutal. It was hard. Was it the hardest MMO? I'm not making that argument. It most certainly was not. It's obviously a lot easier than its predecessors, but the game's difficult. Things were slower, combat slower. Things could kill you much more easily. Grouping up to kill an elite, a rare, a quest mob was well worth the effort. Okay, is it the same now? Yeah, I guess. But 15 years ago, loot was a reward for hard work, not what was thrown at your entire group for every activity that you do. Raid sizes back then, much larger than what they are now. Molten Core, 40 people. Blackwing Lair, 40 people. Naxxramas, for those, I think it's incredibly small, 3% or 1% of the population that did it in vanilla World of Warcraft. Incredibly low percent of the population, 40 people. Onyxia, 40 people. Temple of AQ, 40 people. This meant that your roster as a guild needed to be obviously more than 40 people. Outside of raid nights, there were things that needed to be done, farming resistance gear, for certain bosses, gaining attunements for people to even enter into a group, etc., etc. Groups were needed to get this content done. Now, I'm not going to say that this was a perfect system. There's a lot of complaints. Some of the raids, some of the encounters were pretty rough. We look at Four Horsemen, or pretty simplistic. We look at Baron Geddon or whatever from Molten Core, where things weren't great, but you needed a guild, you needed a group to get stuff done. Now, to be fair, if we say that Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, Naxxramas, Onyxia, Temple of AQ were 40, we do need to call out that we also had some 20-player dungeons. ZG and the Ruins of AQ were 20-player dungeons, okay? Raiding was hard, mostly, I think, due to a lack of knowledge and a raid leader's ability or a guild leader's ability to manage 40 to 60 players, trying to get them online and killing things pretty consistently. Groups and guilds were simply a requirement. Leveling was hard. Your reputation on a server meant everything, and ruining that reputation meant the pain of re-rolling. As simple as that. There was no transferring off. There was no name change. Running away wasn't easy. You were known, good or bad, on your server. That amazing PvPer or that dude that ninja loots things on every dungeon run. That was your reputation. Now, if we look at the Burning Crusade, when it came around, it was more of the same. Okay, classes were fleshed out a bit more. Raid encounters had a little bit more going on, but overall, it was a polished version of vanilla, which was to be expected. I mean, it was the first expansion. However, the big change from vanilla World of Warcraft to the Burning Crusade were the size of raids. Karazhan and Zoloman, 10-player raids. So yes, we did have some 10-player raids in vanilla, or parties, dungeons, I guess. Mount Hyjal, Serpent Shrine Cavern, Black Temple, Sunwell were all now 25-man. Okay? This meant that, again, you would need a few extra bodies, let's say 30-ish people, just in case people didn't show up, etc., etc., but nowhere near the 50 to 60-player roster that you required for raiding in vanilla. This meant that you were cutting a good 20 people, if not 30 people, half of your raid group. Burning Crusade added something new, though. Along with all of the other ways to collect gear from vanilla, we look at crafted gear, we look at obviously raiding, we look at PvP, all that good stuff. There was this new mechanic, Badges of Justice. The idea was that you would obtain Badges of Justice from raids, from heroic dungeons, and you could in turn spend those badges for gear. The gear wasn't as amazing as raiding gear, but it was meant to be a filler. It was meant to be something that if you hadn't gotten an item for that one specific slot over the course of a couple of weeks, and all of your buddies have gotten it, it would be a good filler item until maybe 3 or 4 weeks later when you really do get that one item that you needed. Or maybe you had an alt that you could run through some heroic dungeons with your buddies and you could pick up some catch-up gear, essentially. And it served its purpose rather well. Now, we look at the second expansion for World of Warcraft, Wrath of Lich King. Obviously one that a lot of you guys and a lot of the community feel to be one of, if not the best expansions. And the same story that we saw with Burning Crusade, we see with Wrath of Lich King. There's a lot of polish added, classes were much more fluid, mechanics were solid, encounters were great. The game was fun. The game in Wrath of Lich King, while it had its problems, was a hell of a lot of fun. Raids, though, different. This time, raids weren't just 25 man. They were 10 or 25 man. You as a raid leader, guild leader, whatever, you had a choice. 10 man raids were easier to fill, but they had the disadvantage that any one player's death meant that it was that much harder to cover the DPS requirement, healing requirement, whatever it was. You had to be a lot more selective about your classes that you brought to the raid and the buffs that were available, because a 25 player raid, obviously, more classes, etc., etc. But this also meant that if you were leaving Sunwell, or wasn't there? I can't remember. I swear that there was a no. It was Wrath of Lich King. I'm trying to think. There was a raid at the end after Icecrown Citadel, but that was Obsidian Sanctum or whatever. I'm getting my two expansions mixed up. But it meant that you, as a guild, are leaving Sunwell with 25 to 30 players. That downtime between expansions. You know this is coming, and you as a guild, you as a raid leader, have to make a choice. Do I form a raid much more easily with 10 players and cut 15, 20 players, or we try to do 2 or 3 raid groups and try to manage it all, or do I try to continue to do 25? It was a tough choice. The world first guilds, though, lean towards 25 man. Like I said, a lot more options available, a lot more buffs, etc. While there this ever-growing number of average guilds, I would say, and absolutely nothing wrong with that, turn towards the easier to fill, easier to manage 10-man raid groups. Now, if we go Cataclysm all the way through Mists of Pandaria, again, much the same as the previous expansions, 10 and 25 player raids were now the norm. Okay? And if I remember, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, and I totally could be, but I recall it being the same story as Wrath of the Lich King. That 10-man guilds were your average, generic, normal raiders, whereas the world first guys were knocking out 25 men. It was simply easier to fill. There were more options for guilds, and we're going to get to that. And that's what I remember. Again, could be wrong. You guys correct me. Now, getting into the game, gearing up, raiding were easier than ever before due to lack of attunement quests. If I can remember, I don't think there were any resist gear requirements. Things were just easier to do. Guilds literally sprouted up and died on a daily basis. You'd see, a guild form this week. They'd kill a couple of bosses. There would be some drama because of, some stupid shit. Guild would be done and dissolved the next week. Cross-realm raiding and connected servers were added in Cataclysm, essentially ruining that sense of community that had once been ever present. And again, you had this reputation where you knew hot PvPers, you knew the really good tanks, you knew the ninja looters that people would sit in Ogremar and spam, so-and-so's a ninja looter, so-and-so's a ninja looter. You got to meet these guys, and this cross connection between different communities ruined it, because you would play with a guy one time and you'd never play with him again. Done. Towards the end of Mists of Pandaria, though, a new feature was added. Okay, flex rating. Initially, Mists of Pandaria had looking for raid system, normal and heroic. Think normal as heroic rating now, and heroic rating was essentially mythic. So a little bit more difficult back then. They added in flex rating as a difficulty in the middle after LFR, but before normal. It worked the same as it did exactly today. You started a raid with 10 players, and you could have up to 25. It's now 30. And the raid would scale. Boss health would scale, etc., etc. The system was great for sure, but one that would push players away from competing for a set number of raid spots, and one that truly stopped guilds from trying to push to get to that 25 player, that mark, because you didn't have 10 players, right? So the choice was no longer, I have 15 people, I need to recruit and bust my ass and maybe join another guild, and we merge or something happens to where we can get to 25. Now I can raid with 15. Good, but it removes a lot of what guilds were needed for. Today, if we fast forward all the way through Warlords of Draenor, we fast forward through Legion, and we go up to present day Battle for Azeroth, what do we see? We see pretty much the same stuff. There's far too many difficulties of the game when it comes to raiding. Think about it. We have looking for raid. Okay, I'm not gonna discuss the validity of LFR. Okay, we have normal rating, we have heroic rating, and we have mythic rating. Now, each one of these different tiers of difficulty has to be balanced. It has to be tested, and each difficulty is another barrier of entry. And what I mean by this is some players will not push themselves or their group as a guild or raid leader to try something harder, and those that do try to do that harder content are going to find it more difficult to recruit able-bodied players. Because raid sizes are malleable on everything but the hardest level of content, mythic. There's very little external drive for players to fight for a raid spot, to constantly improve, to do better than your peers, because all you have to do is the minimum to obtain that raid spot. You don't have to continue to earn that raid spot because it's flexible raiding. We don't have to find our best 10 players. We don't have to find our best 25 players. We don't have to find our best 40 players. Now we can have any number, and it doesn't matter. Are you geared up enough? Do you have this magical item level? Can you hit at least this bare minimum DPS check? You got a raid invite, okay? Gear right now, far too easy to obtain. Literally every single activity that you do showers you with loot. Seriously, think about it. Do a world quest. Here's an epic item. Do some PvP. Here's an epic item. Do a dungeon. Everybody gets epic items. There is a mechanic in the game right now with Nazjatar where you farm this currency to literally spend on buying epics in the hope that you get a good one with the socket. Think about that. Just step back for a second and think about this. As a player, you hope that you are going to get a good epic item. The best, short of a legendary, the best items that a player character, your character could obtain. And you're literally rolling in them and buying them willy-nilly, 20 at a time to see if you can get a socket out of one of them. That's ridiculous. This isn't Diablo. This isn't an action RPG. But if that is more of the design that the developers, I can't talk tonight, the developers are taking us, then there will need to be even more changes that need to be made. Those that play Diablo know it's all about chewing through loot. Okay, that is what Diablo is going through loot to try to find that one item, that one singular item that completes your set. We're going to get to sets in a second. The one singular item with that one singular role that's 1% better than what you currently have. And that's okay. I love Diablo. I think it's a great mindless, brainless activity. And that's a perfectly fine thing to do, to chew through loot in an action RPG when the content takes a few minutes, right? A Greater Rift only takes 15 minutes to do. And even then, you're probably burning through it a lot faster than that 15-minute mark. So that's okay when it's an action RPG, not when it's a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, which we've already lost the MMO in World of Warcraft. Gear with this random sockets, random upgrades via the Titan Warforging system, it really ruins the higher levels of difficulty. As many folks, including myself, have said before, why should I do mythic content if I can get lucky and do heroic content and maybe get an equal item? Yes, I understand the chance is not great, but the level of pressure between heroic and mythic difficulty rating and the skill level requirement mean it's much more likely that I will continue to do heroic as a mediocre player and get a mythic level piece, even if it's just one item. I mean, how does that make you as a mythic level raider feel to bust your ass, do 100 pulls on a boss, die, finally get it, and get that one item, that's exactly what you wanted, turn around and come to find out that as a heroic raider, I have that same item. Exact same item level, exact same stuff. It doesn't say mythic on it, but it's been Titan Forged, it's been Warforged, it's been upgraded, whatever. It took me 2 pulls, and one of them was because the mage pulled early. Oops. How does that encourage people to push themselves? Set items, Master Looter, were removed in Battle for Azeroth. Now, I've talked about the Master Looter option being removed and why it's a terrible idea. Short version is this. It removes a good, and here's the key word, a good raid looter's ability to reward players who deserve the gear for showing up, having good attitude, being a true part of a group or guild, and earning the kill. Or punishing those who fail to meet those standards, right? Somebody that shows up late who isn't really working, to earn that raid spot, etc., etc. This was something that a good raid leader could use to incentivize or punish players. The fact is this. Why should anyone in a raid group put out that extra effort, whatever it might be, farming stuff, showing up early, trying to recruit, bumping up their DPS, whatever it might be, if in the end of that raid, the reward being given out is given to someone random? Why should I bust my ass, even though everyone recognizes that I'm busting my ass, if when we kill this boss, the dude that shows up late every night gets the item? Because the raid leader has no control over it. It's frustrating. It truly is. Set items follow the same idea. Why would I put forth the extra time and effort to earn my tier 4 piece? My set items when I can do the bare minimum. Okay. Now, I don't disagree, and again, because someone's randomly going to get it. Now, I don't disagree with Blizzard's argument, and they say that the reason why they removed Master Looter was that some Master Looters didn't operate fairly, right? They ninja looted, etc., etc. However, I don't believe that those numbers were accurate. I think they were grossly inflated. I think it was bullshit. And that doesn't and did not represent the vast majority of raids, raid leaders, guild leaders, etc. I don't believe that there was such a widespread problem with Master Looters being jerks that Blizzard had to step in. Okay, this isn't something that Blizzard needed to step in. If your guild has a crappy raid leader who cannot properly and fairly, and we've talked about this, divvy out the loot, that community is going to take care of it by going, look, here's the deal. We don't want you giving out loot anymore, or we're going to find other guilds, or the guild will collapse, etc. Taken care of. That guy is out of the picture, or he's learned his lesson, okay? Smaller and flexible raid sizes, the multiple levels of difficulty, each one of them a barrier to entry, the cross-realm, cross-server population, the influx of easy-to-obtain gear have all led to the devaluing of the want and need to put in time and work to earn. And that is the key word for this whole video. Earn an item. And it has resulted in a lack of community within the game and a mindset hopping from guild to guild in search of one thing, gear. Now think about it. I want you guys to take a step back. In Battle for Azeroth, when is the last time that you truly felt that you earned something? Okay? When? For me, it's probably doing hard mode Mechagon every single week with the same group so that we could all get the mount. And when it was my turn and the dice were rolled and I got the mount and there's only 2 of us left. Cool. We did it. We did it last week. We got the last guy his mount. Everybody was happy. We earned that. What did it take though? It took a set group of players putting forth effort every single week, doing difficult, it's hard mode. Well, it's difficult content for the sake of others. That's what raiding used to be like. When you got, a legendary, when you did that quest chain and you finally obtained whatever from, the Fang daggers from Cataclysm, that mace for healers from Ulduar, all the different legendaries that were out there. When you earned it, Shadowmourne, the guild cheered. The guild was happy for you because they all put in time and effort for you. Now, I'm not going to bash the Legion legendaries. That's a discussion for a different day. But there is no earning left in World of Warcraft. And that's how Blizzard has killed the need for guilds in this game.